The Supreme Court is going to hear a landmark argument this week about Donald Trump's claim of total presidential immunity for official acts. The scope of that court's decision, expected at the latest by the end of June or early July, will have an immediate impact on the future of Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's January 6th election interference case. And it comes as the court is suffering some of its lowest public support, with majorities now seeing it as partisan and many say unethical, with little oversight on conflicts of interest. All that as a backdrop. This is not the first time the High Court has been caught in the middle of a case that can decide a presidential election. In 2000, the court effectively decided that George W. Bush was elected by ending a recount in Florida that would have given Al Gore 537 more votes. Gore conceded in a gracious speech that is widely praised to this day. The court's decision was accepted by the public. Here with me now is retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Stephen Breyer. Of course, participated in that case. And his new book is Reading the Constitution, Why I Chose Pragmatism, Not Textualism. Mr. Justice, congratulations on a fascinating book.
Thank you.
And I want to go through that with you and go through some of the precedents that you were involved in. So, in discussing that book and cases like presidential immunity, and I know you're not going to talk about a pending case, but turning to the larger issue of how the public respects the court in a polarized age. In looking at Bush v. Gore in 2000, in your dissent you wrote, above all, in this highly politicized matter, the appearance of a split decision runs the risk of undermining the public's confidence in the court itself. That confidence is a public treasure, a public treasure. So does the court risk losing public confidence, as in the past, when they don't do what you wrote in your Bush v. Gore dissent, which you also wrote, this court should resist the temptation unnecessarily to resolve tangential legal disputes where doing so threatens to determine the outcome of an election?
Well, that's what I thought then. I still think that about Bush v. Gore. I wrote that I didn't want to take it. All right, now, what is the bigger issue, you say? I don't know. We've had some pretty bad decisions in the Supreme Court's history, as well as some pretty good ones. I think Brown v. Board is a pretty good one. I think Dred Scott v. Sanford is a pretty bad one. And there are many others. So I told a woman who was the president or chief justice of the Supreme Court of Ghana. She was in my office over here. And one of the questions she asked me, she wanted to bring more civil rights into Ghana. And she said, why do people do what you say? What a good question.
Exactly.
Why? And in trying to answer that, I really had to give examples. I gave the example of the Cherokee Indians, where the Supreme Court said northern Georgia belongs to the Cherokee Indian tribe, and the president, Andrew Jackson, said, well, John Marshall, the Chief Justice, has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. And the president sent troops to Georgia, but not to help the Indians, rather to drive them out. They walked along the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, where their descendants live to this day. And think of the problems of segregation, Jim Crow, and how long it took to not just issue Brown versus Board, saying on paper, yes, they cannot have Jim Crow, but make it a reality? Is it a reality today? Well, the legal part, perhaps. But the legal part, when I was a law clerk for Arthur Goldberg in 1964, my God, a long time ago, I would have said that what the court is trying to do in 64, 10 years after Brown, is to try to get that enforced. And they weren't getting much help. And I remember those signs, impeach Earl Warren and so forth, from the South. And what happened, in my opinion, what happened, and that of a lot of others, eventually the country turned around. The country turned around. The North, too, began to wake up and say what's going on in the South is not a good idea, and you had to get millions of people. And I explained to her how difficult those cases were in Arkansas, where they closed the schools. Okay, now we come up to your case. Your case, you say, is Bush v. Gore. And I heard Harry Reid, the Democrat leader of the Senate, say in the Supreme Court at a dinner, the most remarkable thing about Bush v. Gore is never remarked. What? Well, in his view, he said that case hurt a lot of people. That was his view. Not surprising. About half the country felt that way, maybe a few more than half. And it was wrong. That was my opinion. And I suspect it was his opinion. But people did follow it. And I say at Stanford, when I'm talking to the students, when I tell them that, I say a great victory for the rule of law. I say, I know 1/3 of you think there should have been some paving stones thrown. You're sorry there weren't a few riots and so forth. But before you conclude that, turn on your television set. Not this program. Turn on your television set and see how people decide things in countries where they don't follow a rule of law.
But
now,
do you worry about that now?
You're always worried about it. You're always worried
why
about
will
it.
people follow the law, the rulings of the court, when in Dobbs, justices who have said when they're being confirmed, I will follow precedent, stare decisis, and then they turn and they come up with a decision, 5-4 on Dobbs, reversing a half century of precedent. And as you write about that on Dobbs, you wrote that justices, first of all, you say in your book that justices should pay more attention to the consequences of their decisions instead of focusing only on the text or originalism. How does a judge know what the consequences of a decision will be? In the Dobbs decision, hasn't it been proved in subsequent state bans on IVF, for instance, that the consequences are not being considered by the majority?
I wrote or joined Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor, and we wrote a pretty long dissent with a lot of arguments in it. And that was one of them. We thought that there would be a lot of different decisions in the state, and that's there. But your first question is, why would people follow it? Why? What did I tell this woman from Ghana? What did I tell the Chief Justice there? I said, you have to convince, not the judges. They already understand it, and they're paid to do it. And what about the lawyers? No. You have to convince the people in the villages, the people in the towns, contrary, not your belief, but popular belief. We have 320 million people in the United States, and 319 million are not lawyers. And those are the people
which is probably a good thing, right?
Yeah, over time, over 200 years, people gradually have come to the point of view that we will have some cases we don't like at all. We will have some law we don't like at all. But the more important thing is called the rule of law, because that's what is one weapon in the fight against the kinds of chaos we now are seeing.
But when the respect for the High Court is at such low levels, when people feel it's too partisan, that it's not ethical, that people have conflicts of interest, do you reach a point, arguably, where by following the originalists and the textualists and people who, as you write in your book, are looking at things that are not relevant because they're not, because as you view the law and as you have always interpreted the law in terms of the values of the founders, in terms of what they wanted our country to be and to what they thought the principles of the Constitution should be, not the literal words, because so many things were never even imagined. I mean, look at guns.
What I say to the students, what I say to the students about this document, I said, I found it in a letter George Washington was writing a friend. And he said the same thing, that Joanna, my wife, paid my grandchildren $20 for anyone who memorizes the Gettysburg Address. And the first two lines of the Gettysburg Address say it even better than George Washington. What they say in that Civil War was 77 years ago. I won't get it quite right. Our fathers came forth upon this continent, a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, and women too. But look, we are now engaged in a great war now to see whether this nation or any nation so conceived can long survive. Okay? The word that describes those two great sentences and describes what George Washington was thinking and what describes what I hope every high school student will think today, we are an experiment. Sure, the Lumiere over in France, they wrote all about democracy and human rights. They did the same thing up in Scotland, and you can go back to Rome and you'll find it. But these intellectuals are thinking, yeah, it's a great idea, but they won't be able to do it.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.